Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this online crime and community safety webinar. I'm Martin Bolt. I'm one of the Mirfield counsellors, and I'd like to welcome everybody who's tuning in tonight to this very new way of holding meetings. On the panel tonight, we have my colleague, Councillor Kath Taylor, Inspector, I'm going to call you Councillor then, Chris, Inspector Chris Hughes, our Neighbourhood Policing Lead, Lee Hamilton, from Kirklees Community Safety, and also Sergeant Sean Oates from Kirklees. And we are also supported by wonderful people back in Huddersfield, Olivia and Terence, making sure that everything works smoothly. So thanks to everybody for tuning in. In the past, we've had a number of these meetings physically, where the police have attended, met residents and taken your questions. But obviously, because of the situation at the moment, we can't do that. But we wanted to give people the opportunity to have that engagement, because there have been a number of issues since we started discussing this in early June, where people feel very strongly. I've been asked tonight to pass on our apologies from our colleague Councillor Vivian Lees-Hamilton, and Mark Eastwood, the MP, is unable to join us, but his staff have said they'll watch and also pick up any issues that require their attention. Using the YouTube feed means that we can also interact with residents. You will be given the opportunity to put comments and questions as that goes forward. We have a number of questions which have already been submitted to start the evening off. Before we do get round to the questions, we'll have a brief overview from both the police and Kirklees on issues and data from them, and then we'll move to your questions, at which time Kath will be handling that, asking the questions, and then the police and Kirklees will answer. So thanks very much. And in the hot seat, I think, Chris, it's over to you.
Good evening. In terms of the update for the police, apologies, I'm not in uniform, but I'm on leave at the moment. But I hope you can all hear me okay. The policing picture for Mirfield over the last sort of 4 months has been the same across the district, really. Obviously, with the COVID epidemic hitting us, a lot of the neighbourhood policing functions that we normally have been able to fulfil, we've had to really put them on the back burner and manage a lot of the demand around COVID and the social distancing legislation. I'm pleased to say that we're now starting to ease out of that, so we can start getting back into our normal sort of neighbourhood policing functions, dealing with the ASB and the criminality that is across the district, and in particular for Mirfield. If I look at the overall picture for Dewsbury and Mirfield, as we stand at the moment, the crime situation is, across all crime types, is on a downward trajectory. Some of that will be as a result of obviously the lockdown, where we've just seen a drop across most crime types, but not all. The areas that have seen some increase, drugs offences, which actually is a little bit of a counterintuitive, because that means that officers have been actually stopping, searching, arresting people and dealing with drugs offences much more readily. And the neighbourhood policing team officers under my teams have done a lot of work. I know Sean's done a lot of work with his team, Sergeant Oates there, as of my other sergeants, to really try and target cannabis farms, not just in Mirfield but elsewhere, and to try and break up some of the organised criminality that uses cannabis farms to make money and spills into other types of organised crime around human trafficking and some serious end violence. So that's good that we're able to see a bit of an increase around that. That's also including work with our organised crime team, who are based at Huddersfield, coming across and assisting us, and force resources that we've brought in, mounted, and our proactive inset teams to add some extra pressure locally. So overall, the crime picture is looking fairly steady now, as I said, a downward trajectory. I think the important thing to discuss tonight is the perception of crime as well, because it's very important that we address that. There is a lot of perception that criminality in Mirfield and wider afield is perhaps higher than it is, and I'll go through some comparative stats shortly for people, just to give them a flavour of where we sit. Theft from motor vehicle is something that I'm seeing a little bit of an increase around, not just in Mirfield but across Dewsbury as well. So we're looking at some extra work around that. And one of the other strange things is, although we're seeing overall a reduction in violence, where we're looking at actual physical injury, we have another set of stats where we talk about violence where there's no physical injury, and they include quite a mixed bag of offences. And this is not just a Mirfield issue; it's a wider issue than that. So we're looking at offences such as threats to kill offences, malicious communications, harassment, things of that ilk. And part of that is driven, I think, from the changing culture, as we see the use of social media. That is driving quite a lot of crime recording that's based around things like people making threats that still have to be investigated. And obviously we have to be satisfied that the risk assessment around those threats is robust and that we're dealing with them effectively. So that's a bigger piece of work that we're trying to look at in terms of managing that increased demand around that. The threats as we go forward for the rest of the year, for me, is increasing concern around domestic violence. Certainly during the lockdown period, there's been a lot of extra work there to try and manage that. We have concerns around, obviously, the schools being shut and the amount of safeguarding that hasn't been able to take place from the schools side of it. And we've got a lot of work to do to try and make sure that we're protecting our most vulnerable people. So that's, again, as we start to ease out of lockdown, we'll be having to look at that. I've been quite heavily involved in the last couple of months in planning for the return to the nighttime economy. So the phased return to nighttime economy has taken place now in terms of the extra policing resources. So we're in a fairly comfortable position around that, but that's taken a lot of work to just try and make sure that we can manage that demand as we go forward. In terms of overall criminality, just a very brief, I don't want to hit people with too many stats this evening because it can turn people off and we want to have a good discussion. We look at serious violent crime for Dewsbury in particular from last year. We look at April, May, June, July. There was a total of, for April, we recorded 8 serious violent crimes, May 13, June 9 and July 7. So those were violent crimes recorded within the area of Mirfield, giving you a total of 37, which is sort of a mean of around 9. Out of those, a proportion of that is domestic violence. The 37 that I talked about, 14 of those were domestic violence crimes, and of the other 22, they break down from, in the main, when I've looked through them, it's mostly falls into neighbour disputes and normally assaults where people know each other, although they won't be in a family relationship. And including in that as well is a lower amount of figures around school incidents that we obviously have to record as well. So that's the figure for last year. If we look at serious violent crime for this year, and it's the effects of lockdown. Although we've had the lockdown, the overall figure for serious violent crime for Mirfield has remained for the April, May, June, July at 36. So it's almost exactly where we were last year. And again, what we've seen there is a slight increase in domestic violence for the Mirfield area. It's gone from 14 offences to 19. And again, the balance of those other offences still include the main people at the moment. We're talking about neighbour disputes, some people getting attacked by dogs, and not obviously anything to do with schools because of the lockdown. So the thing Mirfield there in terms of serious violent crime is held steady during the lockdown period, but I still have those concerns around domestic violence going forward, which is something we continue to work very hard on to protect people. I'll just finish off by mentioning something that will be close to everybody's heart. And the thing we're talking about statistics around burglaries is every one of these is a victim of a crime. So we must always remember that. We shouldn't be blasé about the figures. But overall, for burglary in the Mirfield area in 2019, we look at April's figures, there were 7, of which 2 were residential properties. May, 13. Of which 8 were residential properties. June, we had 16, of which 13 were residential properties. And then in July, we saw a drop back to around 10, of which 7 were residential properties. The interesting thing about that is we saw that big spike in May and June, and we were very heavily impacted last year by travelling criminals coming across from Bradford and some from Leeds. And there's been a lot of work to sort of take those teams out of action. And we have seen through lockdown as well, we've been able to impact them quite heavily, working with Bradford and Leeds crime teams to take those travelling criminals out. Within that crime type, we've also had some local people who have been out burgling people's houses. And again, it's the work of the neighbourhood policing team working with our colleagues in CID, district crime team, to try and identify those very early on who's active and to try and get them arrested and remanded in custody as quickly as possible. So that was quite a piece of work last year. This year, due to the lockdown situation, we've gone from a mean of 12 offences per month in Mirfield to around 3. So that is partly obviously the lockdown. We've had people at home a lot more. And we've also had a lot of work during the lockdown period, again, from neighbourhood policing teams where possible, but also a lot of work from the district crime team, which sits within CID, targeting criminals locally who've been out burgling. We've got a lot of good results where we've got people locked up very early on and enough evidence to get them charged and remanded and take them out of the game. So that's kind of the overall position at the moment. It's been a very tough year. We continue to work against a very tough environment, but we do all we can to make sure that we're protecting the people of Mirfield with the officers that we have. I'll finish there, and obviously later on we'll talk in some more detail around some of the ASB issues that we've had locally at the Memorial Gardens, and there's a mention also around speeding as well, which I know at Hopland Lane and stuff like that, where we've done some work. So I just wanted to give you a flavour of where we've been as a neighbourhood policing team throughout 2019 into 2020, and obviously with the very, very strange times that we've been in with lockdown, having to manage that extra demand upon us, which the teams have done a really magnificent job in managing that demand and doing the best we can.
Thanks very much, Chris. James or Lee, do you want to come in from a Kirklees perspective with the introduction and overview?
Thanks, Councillor. Yes, so Lee Hamilton, I'm the Safer Kirklees manager, and just a little bit of an overview of what Safer Kirklees is for people that might not be aware. So it's the community safety partnership. So it looks at the coordination and how we tackle issues around crime, antisocial behaviour, and protecting people from serious harm. So we work very, very closely with West Yorkshire Police, as you would imagine, and also with colleagues from West Yorkshire Fire and Rescue Service, Public Health and the Ambulance Service, as well as various services within Kirklees Council themselves, all with the aim of tackling crime, antisocial behaviour and protecting people from harm. I won't add anything in relation to the data and overview that Inspector Hughes has provided, but just to give people a flavour in terms of the officers that are in and around the area from a Kirklees perspective from the Community Safety Partnership. So we have a Community Safety Officer who supports some of this coordination work in the area. They also cover the Dewsbury locality as well. And hopefully people that are listening will be familiar with our Community and Environmental Support Officer, so known as a CISO, and that really is the face of Safer Kirklees, often dressed in high visibility clothing. We'll be engaging with residents and local businesses, trying to unpick some local pertinent issues and how we might address those as a partnership. We have also got a detached youth work team as well, and you should see those active every Friday and every Saturday. And just one thing I will add just before I finish on this point, during COVID-19, our staff have worked very, very closely with West Yorkshire Police, particularly around the social distancing issue. So there's been lots of partnership work that's been undertaken to try and address some of this, highlight particular areas, hotspots, and then feed this through to the police in terms of hopefully some enforcement action where it's been necessary. So certainly a lot of the activity over the last couple of months, as you can imagine, has been around COVID-19 and the social distancing. That's it from myself at this moment, Councillor. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I'm sure that was interesting for people to get that perspective because, as Chris has said, every crime when it affects someone is a big impact on them. But look, getting it in the bigger picture about how things are across Mirfield will help. Right, we'll move in now to questions which people have kindly submitted. So if Kath, if you'd like to, you want to read the questions out, then we'll take responses from the police and Kirklees, and then you and I can chip in as needed with the council's perspective.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine, Martin. I can keep my headset on. The first question is regarding the memorial ground and the facilities with which are in it. And it says, Mirfield Memorial Ground, the facilities within it has experienced increased levels of antisocial behaviour, vandalism, underage drinking and drug use. Can Kirklees advise what measures are actively being taken to prevent this?
First, Lee or Chris?
Do you want me to go first?
Yeah, you can do, Chris, if you want.
Yeah, so obviously I have close contact with the councillors, and the issues around the Mirfield Memorial Park were raised with me when they first occurred. So we've been running what's called a problem-solving occurrence since the back end of June. I think we commenced that on the 26th after the initial reports came in of antisocial behaviour. So we've been running that since that time, and that's constantly under review, excuse me. So my officers have been patrolling that area, my PCSOs and my ward officers. They did pick up on some low-level ASB at the beginning. They have spoken to the local children and local youths who were there. To be fair, when they've interacted with the officers, they weren't always sort of badly behaved young people. I think there was a lot of issues, as you can imagine, around boredom, etc., as the lockdown started to ease. But we keep that area under review, and at this moment in time, I'll continue to run that problem-solving occurrence, and we'll see if there's any further actions that we need to take in respect of it. I'm very keen that we identify very early on any young people that are involved in antisocial behaviour, because it can lead to further criminality down the line if we don't nip it in the bud. Very often, if we deal with them early on, we can make the necessary representations to parents to make sure that they're aware of what their young people are involved in through a warning system that we have, and that's managed by our antisocial behaviour officers. That just gives us a bit of a foot in the door to hopefully not need to escalate it further towards further sanctions around criminal behaviour orders, because they're quite a way down the line, and we'd rather see that families take ownership of their children and make sure they know what they're doing, where they are at night, who they're mixing with, and what they're up to. So that's quite a good interaction that my officers can have with parents. And if we're not happy that that's being gripped at the family level, we can obviously put the necessary referrals into social care, etc., to add something further to it. So that's in hand. My officers are comfortable around dealing with that, and we also link in very, very closely with the Lee's staff, with the CISOs who also assist us with the patrols and the intelligence gathering. What's really key, and a real key message for me for people, is if you're aware of something going on, please ring it in. I know 101 is not the best system in the world, but please use it. Please use the web portal. Because the information intelligence we get from log is absolutely essential in knowing where these kids are, so we can get to them and deal with things quickly rather than it escalating and getting out of hand. So that's a key message from me for everybody listening. Please don't feel as if it's a waste of time reporting things. It's not. If you don't report it, we don't know about it. And with my scarce resources, I put them where the problems are apparent, and that's only through knowing things, and that's through logs and intelligence and information that comes in from the public and from partners. So it's really important that I know everybody's got WhatsApp groups and group chats and all sorts of different social media, but my staff are not monitoring those. And if you're not ringing it in on 101 or through the web portal, then we won't pick up on it, and we can't act as quickly as we'd like to. So please, if you see something going on, you must report it to the police in the normal way.
Thanks, Chris. I mean, whilst points may not mean prizes in this, I think what you're saying with that towards the end is reports may mean a reaction. No report will certainly not get a reaction from the police. Lee, from the Kirklees perspective about Mirfield Memorial Ground?
Yep, thank you. So I think we're aware of 3 incidents that were reported in June. And obviously that's when things started to ease a little bit. Like with what Inspector Hughes has spoken about and having a regular presence in the area, we do have our CISO patrolling and engaging with young people and families using the area as well. We also, as I've mentioned previously, we have the youth outreach detached team that are in the area Friday and Saturday evenings. What I will add around antisocial behaviour within Safer Kirklees, we have a team that work around antisocial behaviour enforcement. So again, if we come across young people that are reported to be causing antisocial behaviour, we have a process very similar to that Inspector Hughes has mentioned, where we engage with them, we have conversations. There are formal processes, warnings and acceptable behaviour contracts that we can issue. And we particularly look at families or young people and individuals who might be in social housing, etc., and how we can have conversations, how young people's behaviour can affect tenancies as well. So again, working closely with the police to tackle the issue. Yes, we're aware of some issues. Engagement that we've had has been positive with young people, and certainly the detached outreach team report positive conversations with the young people in the area. I think it's also worth adding that prior to lockdown and COVID-19, there were plans to have a youth club within the area, which may detract young people from the memorial ground and park, and may give them some constructive activities. And I know that's now being picked back up again and looked at now that things are starting to ease a little bit.
I don't know if Sergeant Oates wants to come in. Sean looks after Mirfield for me. He looks after Mirfield and Dewsbury East. So Sean's heavily involved in sort of managing the area, and obviously gives yourselves the regular councillor updates. And he's also very important in terms of managing the off-road bike issue that we have across the district. So he runs something called Operation Task Abbey on my behalf, which are off-road bikes. I don't know, Sean, if you want to come in and as you're at the coal face, so to speak.
Yeah, I can expand slightly. I mean, some of the problem-solving investigation that Inspector Hughes mentioned, it does involve rigorous patrol plans. We've had staff there that have been at the Mirfield Memorial Park for hourly intervals during an intensification period when that was first recorded in June. Getting that positive engagement with the youth, looking at identifying, looking at issuing warning letters where appropriate. We've had some work with our crime reduction officer that's been in the area, giving some preventative practices regarding benches and other items that I know were being moved and causing issues around the pavilion area. And obviously had a review of any crime reports that have occurred in that area. Touching upon the off-road bikes, I'll expand later if need be, but those are regularly out Friday to Sunday where we do get them, but they are again demand management led. We currently have 2 bikes in Kirklees district, and they are staffed Friday to Sunday and generally upon high demand areas across the entire district. So if we don't receive the reports of where the bikes are coming from and that information intelligence, we can't be in the areas, but they are perfect also for these harder to reach areas, parks, open spaces, canal towpaths, areas where ASB may congregate. That's factored into patrol plans on that one as well.
Thanks.
Okay. I mean, from the councillor's perspective, we'll touch on some things about CCTV maybe later, but there is a CCTV camera at the junction of Hurst Lane and Huddersfield Road, which Kirklees have been asked to look at because, in the way of things, there were some trees in front of it that needed pruning. This should have been a priority, so they should be ongoing now, so that camera will have a full 360-degree capability. I mean, we've mentioned Mirfield Memorial Park, obviously, in the context of this. It's probably worth stressing to people watching who may not be familiar with the history that land and the buildings predominantly in it were bought after the First World War as a memorial to those who died. So that is, in effect, a war memorial. So damaging things like that, I think many people would take a very dim view of, and hopefully people will respect it. Kath, I don't know if you have anything on that before we go to the next one.
Well, I think, like you say, a lot of people are probably not aware that it is classed as a war memorial, because everybody always associates that with Ings Grove, don't they? Which is where we have the parade and the service and everything else for Remembrance Day. And we did manage to get Ings Grove listed through English Heritage. So the plaques and the monument there are all listed. Maybe it might be worthwhile going back to them and looking and seeing if we could get the Memorial Park as a listed, not just a building, but the whole grounds and everything else. And it's such a shame that it's trashed about, because it's such a nice open space and there's plenty of things going on for everyone. And now the cricket's restarting again as well, so that's even better. But no, I think it's something that might get a little bit better once we get the trees pruned back, as long as you and I don't have to do it, Martin, with the issues that we keep having with the brown bins. But there we go. So that's all I've got to say on that one. Do you want me to go on to? Want me to go on to question 2?
Yes, please.
Number 2 is, what can the police and local ward councillors do to protect our neighbourhood and local residents experiencing abuse and feeling threatened, whilst encouraging these bored and abusive young people to respect their community and the local environments? So this one quite ties in with the previous question, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, it does. Do you want me to go first again?
Go on, Chris.
Yeah, so in terms of our involvement, it's really a reiteration of what I've just discussed. My community safety officers, my ward officers, at the forefront of what they're trying to do is problem solve. Make sure that if we are dealing with groups of youths who are antisocial, that we're getting in there early and doing the appropriate engagement with and dealing with any issues that we see. I think there is, as Lee's alluded to, there's a real need for these kids to have somewhere to be where they're not just bored and congregating, and then we see this damage occur and the other issues that we've mentioned. There's an actual really key thing for me that we've got the assistance from the youth team who can be out there engaging with them around safe behaviours and respecting the local environment and the local community, and also some diversionary activities, which I'm really hopeful that the youth club at the Salvation Army can get online, and we can actually have somewhere for these young people to go. I mean, I certainly remember as a young person having things like this, which we could go to the local church hall, where events were put on. It kept you off the streets, and I wouldn't have wanted to get in any trouble knowing my father. So it's absolutely vital. I know we have children today who are very much into their sort of social media and all that sort of stuff. But I think there's still a real desire for young people to come together and congregate and be social together, and they want to do that, and they just need to have a safe place where they can do that with the appropriate supervision. So I'm really hopeful that we can get that going with the council. My officers would always be in a position to, if needed, go in and support those youth clubs with any kind of educational work that we can do around sort of drug use, drug laws, and certainly our concerns around sort of, which is always in the news, around knife crime and stuff like that.
Lee?
Yeah, so I'm probably reiterating what I've mentioned before about the detached youth work team. And it's not uncommon for them to encounter up to 30 young people, within the area. There has been the occasional evidence of alcohol and or cannabis use, but they do report, in comparison with other areas, that the antisocial behaviour or criminal damage is not at the same level that they might see. I think as well, to answer this question, it's important the work that we do in schools, and certainly Safer Kirklees, we do lots of work in schools around being active citizens, positive citizens, and that's something that has closed down a little bit for obvious reasons because of COVID, but hopefully come September we'll continue to do that work, delivery of sessions as part of the curriculum to talk about antisocial behaviour, how young people's behaviour can affect them in later life, and also how they're perceived by others. So that education has got to be key, as well as that diversionary activities that we've mentioned already, and that general engagement with young people and offering them something to do in the area as well.
I'll just come in and reiterate what Lee said. I mean, I've been in policing a long time, and I'm always very mindful there's a dangerous thing that we can end up demonising young people. Most young people are not involved in criminality, ASB, and where we do find them out and about in the public. Certainly, the officers' interactions in Mirfield, as I mentioned earlier, when they did speak to people at the Memorial Gardens, they weren't they weren't rude, they weren't offensive. They were quite able to have a conversation with officers and be perfectly polite and reasonable. That being said, there was obviously some issues there, but if we're talking about Mirfield geographically, you do not have the same amount of issues with ASB as I have to deal with in other areas within Dewsbury. So that's something that you should take away from this.
Thanks. I think if I could start with responding to the what did the local councillors do? It's probably, again, we are recapping a bit on tonight, but it's always worth it that the three Mirfield councillors managed to secure a huge investment from Kirklees to actually put in CCTV in Mirfield town centre, about 5-6 years ago now. And the money is there for that to be maintained and monitored each year. We know, obviously, we said there are some problems with losing visibility from it. There are some problems that we need to expand the coverage, which isn't always as easy now, because we made a proposal when the planning application came in on the old Lidl site. There was, I think, in the region of £100,000 the developer was putting into Mirfield with no prior conditions, and having clarified that crime and prevention of crime was acceptable, we made a presentation to the planning committee that go to CCTV, but unfortunately the councillors on the planning committee didn't support that. It went to affordable housing. The town council for a while has had a policy of supporting the establishment of community groups. So if people are concerned about their neighbourhood, we have some very active community groups like Upper Hopton Community Association, who will act as a mentor if needed. The Blake Hall area, we've got a very active neighbourhood watch, and the town council has said it will give money to help get these started. In terms of helping the environment, the local environment, again, the town council just before lockdown agreed to underwrite a huge investment to improve the environment throughout all the riverbanks in Mirfield. There was an overhead price tag of about £100,000 there. So there's plenty of opportunities working as local groups for people of all ages to get involved with that. And we have a community hub in Mirfield linking with the schools, youth group, and various provisions. And the town council, again, has offered support for that. But the question said about bored young people. And as Chris has said, most young people are not bored. You know, as you go around Mirfield, you look at the activities we've got, whether that be in scouting, in many of the community halls, or the very successful air training and army cadets that we've got. I think the question I would pose is, if young people are bored, and we have sporting groups, we have other social activities, if there is something that they're not getting in Mirfield, then please tell us about it. Because if there is a demand for an activity or something else, then certainly we as local councils would look at that. There was a call some years ago for what they called youth pods, which were like shelters that were put into community spaces. And so we funded one of those to trial it. So whatever it is these days that the young people may not be getting met, we've got skate parks and various other things, please come and tell us, and we will certainly, as local councils, look at it, and working with community groups who often comment and scrutinise planning. there may be some money comes through from a planning development that we can put to good use. So if we do get unwelcome development, we may get welcome additions out of it. Whatever it else is, then, but certainly, I'm sure everybody would echo that no matter how bored you are, there is no excuse for being abusive or damaging property. Thanks.
Martin, can I just come in on that?
Certainly can.
Thanks, because Chris earlier mentioned the Salvation Army, and I've been having talks with them this week, and they're trying to get a summer activities play scheme going over the next few weeks, and they're wanting to do that in the showground. So we're just waiting to get the okay from Kirklees for them to be able to proceed with that, and they reckon they can sort of take about 40 youngsters per day. So that's something else that will probably be for the younger end, but it's something else that we're sort of supporting and trying to help get organised for them. Okay.
Great, Kath. Leading on to question 3.
Question number 3. I'll have to get to my next sheet of paper. Question number 3 is, there is an apparent lack of investment in community facilities in the Mirfield area. Mirfield Cricket Club Pavilion being a prime example of an under-maintained community asset which has suffered from criminal damage and lack of repair and crime deterrence. What is the Kirklees policy towards ensuring such facilities do not fall into decay and remain for the generations to come?
I think that one's yours, Lee. Chris steps back swiftly.
To be honest, Councillor, I'm going to put that one back because it's not a question around community safety. It's more about the investment in the local area, you know. So I think that's more of a wider council issue than predominantly around the community safety side of things, of which Safer Kirklees would represent.
Okay. Something coming up saying log into Teams. I hope that's the issue about investment. I think many people would look at that, and many things like we had the Mirfield Community Centre taken over by Community Asset Transfer, and they found there were lots of things there that they had to bring up to speed, the safety alarms and other things. And yeah, we could. It's probably better to have that kind of a discussion in person with people so they can understand it. But certainly, when you look at some other areas, yeah, and you see the money that gets invested. And you see the fact that Mirfield buildings, such as the old council offices, Westfield Centre, etc., are being sold off. Then there is an issue about, could we reinvest some money? And we always, certainly, I know Kath, myself, and Vivian will constantly push for that. But some good news within the last couple of days that relates to Mirfield Memorial Ground and the Memorial Pavilion. There was some £40,000 from developer contribution that the agreement said was to be spent in Mirfield Memorial Ground. And last year, I highlighted with Kath and Vivian, we said, well, yeah, you've got some money, mend the roof of the cricket pavilion. That didn't get done, and we've had some very strong and robust exchanges with Kirklees staff about why that hasn't happened. And in the last couple of days, it's been confirmed by Kirklees staff that we're getting the roof mended on the cricket pavilion. They're not going to use the planning money, they're going to use central budgets. That's a double reason for celebration, because it means that £40,000 is still there for us to use to enhance Mirfield Memorial Park. So that's the money that came from Darren Smith's development in the former Lidl site. The policy, I think we'll have to pick up on that, and we'll ask a question of the leader or the cabinet members, and we'll get your feedback on that we can put back onto this forum. Question 4, please.
Question 4. This is regarding an issue that we've been dealing with for the last week or so, which has been rather emotive regarding travellers, and this resident is wanting to know why nothing is done when they'd obviously broken the locks off the gate to gain access to the field. They also had an email apparently from the police, quoting a reference number, advising that they would be contacted within 48 hours. The residents saying that as of a week tomorrow, they're still waiting for a reply back. This person's had to work from home because of lockdown and has found it very offensive having a full view from his house of people using the field as a toilet. And he's saying that we pay our council tax and rates, but are the ones who suffer. They drive up close behind you on a night whilst walking the dog, trying to intimidate you. Loud music is playing, foul language, bags of rubbish dumped in bushes. They even dump trees, which they have had cut down for customers in the field. As if we did this, we would be fined. What are the police and Kirklees going to do about this?
Shall I go first again?
Yes, you go first, Chris, because I've got loads of grey hairs from the last week.
I know. It is something of a seasonal issue that we deal with travellers across not just Mirfield, but obviously Dewsbury and into Batley Spen, in fact, across the entire district and across the entire of West Yorkshire. There is always concern. One of the often things you mentioned there around, damage to padlocks, the police don't do anything about it. In terms of offences, we will arrest anybody who we can form reasonable suspicion that they've committed an offence. So if we have somebody saying and prepared to put pen to paper, and I've had this before, where people have put pen to paper and said, yeah, I saw X damage that gate or snap that padlock off, and I'll give you a statement, and we've arrested that person and dealt with it. There is a feeling, I think, within the community that people of the travelling community get something of a free pass, perhaps, from the police. That isn't the case. In fact, one of the people involved in the site at Mirfield was arrested for due to the intelligence checks that we conducted on the site. It was noticed that he was responsible, or it's certainly a suspect for an aggravated burglary offence in South Yorkshire. So he was arrested, as we'd arrest anybody else for an offence. So I just want to reassure people, although there's a perception, okay, again, we come back to perception, that we don't arrest people of the travelling fraternity when they turn up. If there is sufficient evidence to form reasonable suspicion that they've committed a criminal offence, they will be arrested. And that is a fact. When we come on to the question of the use of police powers under what's called Section 61 of the Criminal Justice Public Order Act 1994, those particular powers are there. However, we have to go through the guidance that's provided by the National Police Chiefs Council and by West Yorkshire Police's policies around how we implement those powers. There is a very clearly defined policy around how we would do that. And again, I have been in situations where the encampment has breached the certain areas of policy that would allow us to act and use Section 61 powers. That is not always the case, and under the policy, it's not simply sufficient that we have a encampment form up in an area for us to action those powers under Section 61, and that's why we sit in the background in a little bit, if you like, and it's the council that would come forward, as they have done this week, and seek a possession order in order to get the travellers evicted from that site. It comes down to a lot of questions around public or private land. If it's public land, there's certain categories of public land. So, for example, where I've had in the past an encampment on school premises, when they turned up at Bradford one time on a school premises on the play area, we very quickly liaised with the council and institute Section 61 powers there to have them removed, because obviously that's what's called sort of a priority one land, and we wouldn't have the upset to the settled community and the upset to the school that would be caused by having an encampment on a school playing field. So those are the sort of considerations that we have to consider as the police. There are issues around human rights. There's issues around the proper use of the policy, the proper use of the law, and being able to arrest people lawfully. We just can't arrest people on a whim. We need to be able to form that reasonable suspicion, as I've outlined. So I hope that kind of explains a little bit more context, that this is not a simple issue that the police could turn up and we choose not to do things. We have to act within the law, and and within the policies that are provided to us.
Okay.
Lee?
Yep, thank you. And I know, councillors, you've been working hard on this one over the past week. So, as Inspector Hughes mentioned, hearings were heard yesterday and successful in gaining the possession order required for eviction, and that eviction date was set today. Now, despite COVID and some of the issues, we do have around about a 10-day cycle for that. And we managed to keep in time with that, within the 7 to 10 day process. Site is now secure, and I know previously there have been travellers on the same site, and it was secure previously. So officers are out doing some further work to see what other kind of design secure measures they can put in place, whether that's boulders or barriers. And I know there's a padlock on the gate at the moment that's been put on by somebody. So work closely with the police. We're the ones in the background within the council that apply for the eviction order. We managed to be successful with that today and move the traveller site on. That was within the set time scale of 7 to 10 days, and now it's about going back to the site, revisiting it. How can we prevent it happening further above and beyond the padlock that was cut off on the gate previously?
Thanks. I think again, just an update on things. Residents may not be aware that the situation has changed with regards to local authorities. Some years ago, it was incumbent on the local authority to consider providing a site for travellers. That was taken out of legislation, and the responsibility for a council now is only to designate land in the local plan, as it does with other things. That was controversially done last February, and a large area of land within Kirklees was designated as a traveller site. The situation now is that land is privately owned. It's just been rezoned by the council. So if any travellers or group of travellers want to have a site in Kirklees, it's up to them to negotiate with the landowner, then apply for planning, the same as anybody would for change of use and facilities. But just to stress that there is no requirement for a local authority now to use public money to provide that kind of a facility. But in Mirfield, we've, as councillors, we've worked for many years, probably as long as we've each been on the council. We've had issues that have come up, be that on Battyford playing fields, Knoll Park. At each time, we look at strengthening the situation. Knoll Park was probably one of the last major encampments before Old Bank. And we asked Kirklees to put a fence up, thinking it would be a wooden fence. So we worked with the public then to start planting a community orchard as, if you like, a second line of defence. We've now got a metal fence around Knoll Park, which, as has been mentioned, we're looking at a review of all sites in Mirfield that have got gates. Is the lock robust enough to stop anything other than something like a still saw? And because they should be, people shouldn't be able to just go with bolt croppers and take them off. That's just a waste of public money. I would like to say I'm thankful to the members of the public who did secure Old Bank. It's something that local councils have raised with Kirklees, that the land shouldn't be left unlocked when we've secured it. As soon as the last traveller moves off, it should be secured and made good before the cleaning teams can go on. And in this case, residents took direct action. We are told that they told Kirklees where the keys were, but Kirklees didn't pass that down to the crews on the ground, which is a communication issue. But we'll keep working on that and hopefully strengthen the situation in Mirfield so that we're not sat here in the future talking about the same thing. Kath, number 5.
Number 5, right. This is, can the local authority or the police confirm that some or all of the Mirfield WF14 postcode is still designated as a no cold calling zone? And the other part of the question is, what further action can be taken and what additional measures implemented to protect our residential areas from unwelcome canvassers and salespeople, and reassure the residents that their households and properties can be secured and protected from unwelcome cold callers who are threatening and abusive when their services are declined?
Do you want me to come in, councillor?
Yes, please.
Yeah, that would be good. Yes.
So yeah, the entirety of the Mirfield ward is a designated no cold calling zone. However, the problem you have with no cold calling zones is the enforcement of those, and that's not something that the police or Safer Kirklees would enforce. It does rely on sorry, I've just
Trading standards.
Yeah, it does rely on trading standards. So calls from residents to get in touch with trading standards, and if there's, of course, trading standards would then have conversations with these companies and businesses. I suppose the difficulty then comes with potentially the rogue traders and maybe some of those independent individuals that are maybe cold calling, and trading standards would then have difficulties with some engagement and some discussions and potentially enforcement with them. So yes, the area is a no cold calling zone area. However, enforcement wise is not something that we can look at and we can do. Of course, if there is harassment, alarm and distress, we would encourage people to contact the police, giving relevant details, times, dates and descriptions, and I'm sure Inspector Hughes will come in here, and then that would be picked up accordingly for the harassment, alarm and distress that was caused, or any crimes that were then committed.
Absolutely, it's very straight what Lee said. So if we have a situation within Mirfield where we have residents who are concerned that we've got people cold calling or bogus callers, anything like that, anything that seems out of the ordinary, people know their communities and they know what looks normal. If there's ever any concerns around that, then I would urge people to contact the police as soon as possible. It's very easy for us to get a patrol there, check these people out, and if they're bona fide, fair enough. If they're not, we'll look at what action we can take. It might be just that we can develop some intelligence. We might be able to seize vehicles off them. There might be sufficient to search the persons themselves, and we can certainly disrupt their activity. So it's absolutely crucial that if people are picking up on anybody in their streets and the neighbourhoods that they're not comfortable with, they must get in touch with the police as soon as possible. Please do not. I know people will share things on, as I've said, to come back again, on social media feeds, on WhatsApp groups. That doesn't help. We need to get to these people as soon as, and protect vulnerable people in our communities from being preyed upon. So it's absolutely crucial that you get through. If you feel that there's a crime in progress, that somebody's a bogus call or something like that, ring 999. We will get somebody there and check it out. I don't want to take the risk of some elderly person or somebody's very vulnerable being preyed upon by criminal gangs in our communities, when we can actually get there quickly and deal with them. So that's when it's happening in front of you. Don't feel as if you can't contact us. You must do so. In order to target hardened communities, I'm very keen that, and I always push the Neighbourhood Watch. We have Bev Fox, who works for our Neighbourhood Hub. She's very keen, and she will help people to set up Neighbourhood Watches. They are very, very good for intelligence sharing, for just developing that sort of community spirit and a bit of community safety and security. So if anybody out there listening is interested in setting up a neighbourhood watch in their areas, the details, I'll leave my details at the end of the event, and people can get in touch with me, and I'll point them in the direction of Bev, and she will get in touch with you and take you through the steps to set up neighbourhood watch. And the other thing I'd say is West Yorkshire Police are really pushing something called community alert, which is something I've signed up to. It's very good. Again, we can push information out if we're concerned, if we have intelligence that we know perhaps bogus people are in the area, or we have intelligence, or we just want to get a message out around what to do around bogus people or cold callers or anything like that. We will push that information out through Community Alert, and it's really an education tool to make people aware of things that are going on in their community. And we use that for a range of crime prevention initiatives, sort of burglary issues, anything like that. So Community Alert, again, if you go onto the West Yorkshire Police website, there's a link on there. It takes a minute to sign up to Community Alert, and you can basically pick who you want to get the alerts from. It's not just West Yorkshire Police. You might want to get from the fire service or other partners, and it's a really useful tool for us to be able to update people very quickly with stuff that we want to push out.
Thanks, Chris. I think they some time ago the no-call calling zones, when they were being introduced by the police and trading standards, there were some really horrendous tales of why this initiative was being launched, that vulnerable people were being exploited. And somebody may call round and say you've got a TV aerial that needed retuning, or the roof, or the driveway, or the gardens, the trees. What was said at the initial launch was that a vulnerable person doesn't just get hit once. That information will be sold or shared in the criminal community. So you have a pattern then, and it was seen that vulnerable people, either with money in the house or being taken to the banks, were being exploited. And at the end of it, the lowest of the low were people who couldn't be bothered defrauding or doing shoddy work, that would just assault somebody. So it's a shame that we haven't got legislation to prohibit. Is there anything in existing laws? I mean, where we've asked Kirklees at the moment, but exclusion orders aren't relevant for this. Is there anything in anything like a hawker's license, a street traders, or other? Sometimes some of these old laws, you can adapt them. You know, are people allowed just to trade on the street for cash? Because I know that certainly the law for scrap dealers was changed. In some ways, it's difficult to police that, because unlike taxis, a scrap dealer doesn't have to have a very visible plate on a vehicle. I think it's just a paper certificate that's supposed to carry, which makes it difficult. But what can we do to make Mirfield, and use Mirfield as an example and try it and roll it out later? What can we do to help our vulnerable people?
I think, Councillor, if I come in, I think, as you mentioned, we have, haven't we, over the past week or so, looked at some other powers that we might have. So we looked at the Public Space Protection Order, but that, as the name talks about, is around a public space, so doesn't apply to people's homes. I think it goes back to things that Inspector Hughes has spoken about already, and it's around communities and communities policing themselves. It's supporting those vulnerable people within the communities, and we all have a role to play around that. And it's around that reporting of suspicious or intimidating behaviour to the police to build up a pattern, and then that we can share that on via community alerts or via other mechanisms amongst the local community, just to raise awareness. And in terms of the other laws, it's things we can continue to take away and look at. But I suppose for those that are most vulnerable, then we do have things in place to support the most vulnerable in the community, don't we? But in terms of specific laws, there's nothing else that we're aware of that can assist.
No, and I know a lot of the stuff that we talk about is very old law. I mean, I get requests through for peddler certificates, things like that, and obviously we'll do the due diligence on applicants in terms of police checks and make sure that they're not haven't been involved in criminality. But just the fact that it's, the peddler certificate, it tells you we're going back to sort of Victorian times. It's very ancient legislation. So the message I've got for everybody out there is that vigilance for your neighbours, and just to your communities, what sits right with you, and when something's amiss, and trust your instincts. When the hairs on the back of your neck stand up and you think that doesn't look right, then you need to do something about it.
And maybe, Councillor, if it's coming through that it's a repeat problem, maybe we need to go back to trading standards, maybe launch a little bit of a campaign again in the area, invite trading standards up to the area. Let's knock on some residents' door. Let's talk about doorstep crime, things to look out for. Maybe if it is a big issue, we can look at some form of dedicated campaign just to push it again and highlight the issue.
Thanks for that, yeah. And the last question we'd had pre-submitted.
Last question. This is the longest one of all, and this is pertaining to traffic and speeding in Hopton Lane. Back in May, residents set up an online petition calling for action to tackle speeding in Hopton Lane, Lower Hopton. The petition called for traffic calming measures to slow drivers and was addressed to Kirklees Council and West Yorkshire Police. It has been signed by 466 people so far. Residents secured the support of the 3 Mirfield Walk councillors and Dewsbury Mirfield MP Mark Eastwood. Mr Eastwood raised the matter with the Chief Constable, who pledged to make Hopton Lane one of the local priorities and referred the issue to the local neighbourhood policing team for action. Could our local councillors and or the Highways Department and Inspector Hughes please provide an update on what action is to be taken to make Hopton Lane safer for local residents and the wider community? And specifically for Inspector Hughes, could the inspector tell us if speed checks have been carried out in Hopton Lane, and if so, what the results were? If checks have taken place, could he also detail the exact location, please?
I'll start off there. I'm gonna hand over to Sergeant Oates. Sean has led on that piece of work for me, so he has been running the speed enforcement work that we've done. So I'll let Sean explain what we've been up to.
Yeah, I'll start with the latter half of the question then. It does feature, since concerns were raised, on the Mirfield MPT priority listing on our force website, speeding issues in and around Mirfield, Hopton Lane, Sunnybank Road, and a couple of others there. It forms part of our neighbourhood profiler for problems, and it is something we have been looking at quite robustly. 2 of our ward officers have been routinely taking out our Pro Laser speed device, which is a piece of speed measuring equipment that allows us to accurately get a measurement of a vehicle on a road where there may be suspicion of excess speed and take appropriate measures against that. So just to briefly discuss the approach we would normally look at routinely in road traffic matters. We'd take a bit of a 3-step appeal in these type of settings, looking at education initially, engineering options, ways of perhaps working with highways, traffic calming measures, other physical variations that might be able to reduce speed on a road, and then enforcement as a final option there, if all of us have been exhausted. So the Pro Laser check fits in nicely with the initial part there, just to try and assess issues regarding excess speed. I can say that they've been out 2 or 3 times a working set, which will be across 7 days, a variety of different times and durations, mornings and evenings. And I believe the highest speed recorded to date was 37 miles per hour, which was an elderly female travelling along Hopton Lane.
So, lady racer.
Yeah.
Penelope pit stop.
Yeah. Again, yes. it might be we're at the wrong location at the wrong time, perhaps. So again, encourage reporting there. We do need that information from the community to know where the issues specifically are, when they specifically are. Realistically, with staffing, we can't have somebody at a location at a road all day, so we've got to try and reduce down and pinpoint those precise moments of problems. Or if there's a vehicle in particular, if we've got a registration, we could do some early intervention work, do some keeper inquiries and go around and have that initial education approach prior to even catching them on the road. It'll allow us to escalate things a little bit further there. Going forward then, we will be looking at continuing these checks. That visibility there should be a bit of reassurance for the community. If we can get that willing observation of the speed limits on these roads anyway, it will naturally reduce speed over drivers. If everyone else is maintaining to 30, it prohibits people behind them, in front of them, from speeding in excess in front of that as well. So I think everybody's got a role to play there in keeping check of your own speeds. We've got operations coming up in the near future, running early August, which is Operation Safeway. Some of our op support, traffic and other operational vehicles will be coming into the district area, looking at what we'd class as the fatal 4 concerns with road traffic matters, speeding being a primary one, mobile phone use, seat belts and drink and drugs issues. So there'll be some additional resources there that will be linking in with our neighbourhood policing teams factoring in focus on areas like Mirfield where we can intensify a little bit and complete some additional checks.
I'll just come in, councillors, just as a little bit of context around it as well. Is we did see during when the main part of the lockdown was in effect, and we had a hugely reduced amount of road traffic, as I'm sure you're aware. It was at that point that we did start to see, not just at Mirfield, but across Dewsbury and across the entire Forks area, to be fair, a big increase in speeding offences. As you know, you had young people in the main. I won't say it was all young people, but people who were stopping in the 30s or so, who were obviously just treating it as a bit of a racetrack, especially of an evening. So certainly the concerns around Hopton Lane seem to peak at around that time as well. So as we're starting to come back to a bit more of a normal situation on the roads, we are starting to see a return to normality in terms of the speeding offences that we're picking up on. So we're kind of coming back into a bit of normality, but there was certainly a big increase in speeding across all areas during that initial phase of the lockdown, which we were working hard to try and manage amongst everything else.
I think, the 3 E's was interesting, Sean. I've always used the latter two the other way around and had enforcement before engineering. The downside of engineering is every driver suffers from speed humps, and it's the speeding drivers who want to stop. But I suppose you would say that, wouldn't you? What's the police or Kirklees view on 20-mile-an-hour zones? I know in Leeds, for example, they had a big push to roll out 20-mile-an-hour zones, and are, I believe, all around outside schools, even on some major roads. Obviously, you still get people flouting, but if people are flouting 20, there could be less of impact than when they're flouting a 30 zone, couldn't there?
I think from a policing point of view, yeah, there are 20-mile-an-hour zones outside the schools my children use, which I'm very comfortable with, and I think it is absolutely about where they're placed. So I wouldn't say the police have any sort of adverse feeling around it, but obviously that's decision making that sits at the a level up from me, really. But yeah, I don't know if Lee's got any different views, but I'm not per se against anything that makes life safer on the roads for people.
I mean, just on the highways point initially, before I come on to that point, councillors, we haven't had a response as of yet, so maybe that's something we can come back with your support. We can get a response from highways on that question. And yeah, just similar to Inspector Hughes, you know, where I live, we have 20-mile-an-hour speed zones. Again, it's around the enforcement of that, and if people, you know, are following that. Yeah, so nothing really further to add in terms of that. I think I'd come back down to the enforcement of it.
Thanks. Yeah, I think again I suppose we just need to go back to the person who asked this question, because the question says the petition has been signed by 466 people so far. I'm not sure whether that petition has therefore actually been submitted to Kirklees. If they haven't submitted the petition, Kirklees won't have done anything about the petition. I know that the highways have a policy that when they do receive a petition, it gets an investigation and other things. But certainly, again, I know Vivian has asked for speed, the rubber strips down on there, which give you the volume, the number of vehicles using it, and it also gives you speed data. That speed data can be taken over whatever period they're down, and then gives the police the intelligence to be able to go out and enforce when people are speeding at most. So hopefully Kirklees will be actioning that ahead of any petition, so that they can give the police the intelligence to be taking enforcement in the interim while they consider what engineering measures, if they're needed, may be able to put on. Because obviously Hopton Lane, you know, you can imagine if you start putting speed humps on a steep hill in winter, it could create problems. But that's for the highways engineers to resolve. I mean, there are many places around Mirfield where we're getting reports, as I'm sure the police are aware, of speeding and antisocial driving. You can hear them on an evening, flying down Sunnybank, going on Old Bank, etc. I'm sure throughout the area. But again, I think this is, as we come back to it, it's the community. If you've got issues in your area, then please report them. If they're not ongoing immediately, then it's 101, or I think there's a live chat as well on the computer, isn't there, Chris, that can go on and get to talk to them?
There's a live chat web portal, and I think as of 2 weeks ago now, if anybody's got any dash cam footage of sort of driving without due care, anything like that, there's now a facility. If you go onto the West Yorkshire Police website, my understanding is we've now got a facility similar to other forces where you can actually have that uploaded, and it can be looked at by the police, and if there's sufficient to prosecute people, then we can do that. And
smiled when you said Operation Safeway, because that's one of the supermarkets that we haven't got in Mirfield yet. We funded an initiative, and we've discussed it before, which dealt with driver behaviour and mobile phones and stuff. And one of the things that we used on that initiative was at junctions at peak time, cops were out in plain clothes, because if they see somebody in high vis, people change the behaviour patterns. What we found with the initiative that the local members funded before was somebody walking down the road. I know West Midlands have taken this further with their close pass initiative, is you might see somebody with a seatbelt off, on the phone, etc. So if that can be included in Operation Safeway, you may find that it also has ancillary benefits. The thing that we ran, they also found people who were wanted on warrant, either taking drugs, carrying drugs, etc. Whereas if you guys go out in your full high vis, what I've seen on occasion is people do a quick U-turn before they get to the place where you're pulling them in.
Yeah, what we've run before, and we ran it last Christmas as well, with in partnership with Metro. They actually provided us with, I had a small bit of budget, then I was able to basically hire a bus from Metro for an evening. And my proactive officers went out in plain clothes and were able to deal with a lot during the sort of early evening, and dealt with a lot of offences for certainly use of mobile phones at the wheel. So if there's any funding for something similar to that, I know my proactive officers would be more than happy to look at. It's probably too soon for the Operation Safeway in terms of getting it pulled together, but if we can have a chat in due course, Martin, about pulling something together around using that kind of tactic, which is very useful. Caused a lot of upset. So a lot of people were very positive about it on social media, and there are others who thought we should be doing something else with our time. But that's you can't please everybody.
Those are usually the ones that you pull in. Like when you pull somebody for speeding. And
no doubt, yeah, no doubt.
Got a question that's come in on the YouTube. It's about the travellers. Rather than having a padlock on a gate, which can and does get cut off, could we look at something to activate the barrier, such as a keypad or a card entry system? And I think, Lee, that's something that's well worth taking back.
I have an answer for you.
Oh, go on then.
Keypad can be done. Card entry is a no, but keypad, yes, that can be done.
Okay. So if you could ask staff at Kirklees then how we roll keypads out, and particularly, we've got to get a new padlock at Old Bank. If they could keypad entry that, I'm sure many people would appreciate that as an immediate one.
I'll take that back for the relevant staff within assets. Yeah.
I don't think there's any other.
Any capacity, Martin, to add into that? I don't know what obviously everything's a cost. Any kind of PIR, CCTV to cover the frontage as well. So if we do end up in a position where people are breaking through something of that ilk, at least we'll have some evidence to lock people up and charge them.
I'm sure we'd welcome more CCTV throughout Mirfield, Chris. Yeah.
Just
yeah, if they look at that. Target hardening, I think, is what you call things like that, isn't it?
That's right. And Steve Forrest, our crime prevention officer, would be. I know he's got a stock of PIRs and other things, but he'd be very useful to have a conversation with. But again, we can take that forward outside of this.
Well, that leads us into future action and community plans. I think if one future action then is talking with Steve and staff from Kirklees responsible for the parks, car parks, and that. Yeah, we've asked for a review, but with this information as well, if we feed that in, that if Steve could make any comments as well, that would be most welcome.
Yeah, definitely. Be very, very keen to help out with that.
So we haven't got any feedback on this, but future actions, I think, from what we've said, all parties are willing to work with the community to set up community associations and neighbourhood watch. The police certainly can help give people the resources to start taking measures to protect themselves. And the question for our vulnerable members is for neighbours not to be vigilant. If you see someone in the area who's acting suspiciously, then a good bit of neighbourliness never goes amiss. I don't know if anybody has any other points going forward.
I don't think so.
Just for myself, Councillor Ball, if there are any community groups out there that want to run initiatives for young people, then please do get in touch with Safer Kirklees. We can certainly help with the support of funding applications, particularly, the Police and Crime Commissioner does have funding pots that regularly become available, so we can help with funding applications, signposting to relevant funding pots, or certainly help with the establishment of some schemes. So yeah, Safer Kirklees are there to assist if needs be.
And any residents wanting, we've got contact details for everybody who's here today. Thanks everybody for turning up. I know certainly Chris, you're in your leave. I don't know, Sean, if you're working or if you're on a day off, but thanks everybody
I hope he's working, because if he's sat at home in uniform, there's some questions to ask.
Oh, no,
He's got his uniform on.
Just seen he's got. You can't tell these days with this dress down stuff. It's only when he moved I could see his stripes. It's either that or he's got a dodgy padlock at home.
No, it's been a pleasure, Martin. It's always good to be able to discuss these things, so that's fine.
Okay, thank you everybody, and thanks to everybody for watching. We'll see you around Mirfield. Stay safe. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank
Bye.
you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye.